Cool. You can't hear me, can you? Okay. I'm going to...
I think you have to push
It's
the button.
now it should be live. Now can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to try to speak very close to the mic, and I'll advise our two guests to do the same as well. We are, as I had mentioned, starting out with a conversation about urban mobility. I think we have a lot of urban dwellers in the room here with us. And I'd like to introduce right away, since we just have half an hour, and I'd like to get your questions in, our guests. So immediately to my left is Eva Kreienkamp, who is the CEO of the BVG, the BVG, which is Berlin's public transport operator. And she's going to be speaking to us in a moment. And we also have Ross Douglas with us, the founder and CEO of Autonomy, which is the world's leading sustainable mobility network. So I'd like to ask Ross to start with a presentation that he has prepared for us.
Thank you, Sumi. Okay, so my name is Ross Douglas, and I'm going to talk about why we need to transition from being motorists to mobilists. And for me, the genesis of the idea really came when I went to Lagos to do an event for startups to pitch their ideas to VCs with a friend of mine who was Nigerian. And we've got these really interesting investors who came out from the States who were ex-Nigerians, and we had these great young Nigerian entrepreneurs. And every single entrepreneur would get asked the question, well, how will you move your goods from A to B? Because in Nigeria or in Lagos, there's absolutely almost zero mobility. And at the time, I was using a driver, which you do in Lagos, to move, and I averaged about 3 to 4 kilometers an hour. And I would commute for 2 to 3 hours to do a meeting, which was 4 or 5 kilometers away. And what is very clear to me is that as you keep adding cars into cities, you keep getting less and less mobility. And one of the few solutions people had, which doesn't really work, was that they would buy police lights from the police to try and push the other cars out the way with their flashing sirens. And that's how unbelievably constricted it became. So, I started understanding that increasing car ownership just really is a massive problem. So I, at the time, got all excited and moved to Paris in 2015 to create the world's first urban mobility event that was focused on post-car ownership. At the time, the biggest trend was amongst Europeans moving from normal motor cars to SUVs. So it was a completely premature idea. I lost my money and had to start again with new investors. But along the way, I've learned quite a lot. And what I want to talk to you today about is why we need to transition more from motorists to being mobilists as opposed to just from combustion to electric. So, let me go to the first slide. So obviously what's happening now in Europe is we've got Fit for 55, which is the EU's plan to halve carbon emissions by 2030 and go to carbon neutral by 2050. A big part of that plan is the banning of combustion vehicles from 2035. So the hope, obviously, is that we can radically reduce carbon emissions by converting from ICE, internal combustion engines, to electric vehicles. The problem is that only really reduces carbon emissions if you have 100% renewable energy. What we've learned due to the energy crisis now is that we don't have 100% renewable energy in Europe, and we are unlikely to have 100% renewable energy for a very long time. Energy is very difficult to create, particularly renewable energy. It takes time. And when you have big electric vehicles, which generally weigh 2 tons to move an 80-kilogram person, they just require a lot of energy to move that amount of mass for the result of moving a person from A to B. There are other, obviously electric vehicles are called zero-emission vehicles, and while they are better on most occasions to combustion vehicles, there are other emissions that will become more and more problematic. The first one is tire emissions. So what is now being realized and discovered is that microparticles and microplastics going into the oceans, the most toxic part of that is from our tire emissions, what they call tire dust, particles that come off on the road, get washed down the rivers and into the sea, and they're super, super toxic, killing fish. What will happen in the future, obviously, is we'll have legislation to reduce those emissions, and that legislation will go against electric vehicle ownerships owners who have just been subsidized to buy electric vehicles. So that will be problematic. The other big problem, obviously, is that electric vehicles just require a massive amount of minerals to make the batteries. An electric vehicle has roughly half a ton of battery in order to give you the desired autonomy of 400 kilometers that most people feel they need to have an electric vehicle. This is a very beautiful photograph of a lithium mine in Chile. And with those lithium mines, what they do is they get the sludge of lithium, it evaporates, and it takes about 2.2 million liters of water to produce 1 ton of lithium. Obviously, as we go to a warming planet, we go to a water-scarce planet. The amount of lithium we produce today is not sufficient for the amount of electric vehicles we hope to make, and we need to increase the mining of lithium by 40 to 50 times of what it is today. So these are some of the externalities that we often don't think about, just because obviously electric vehicles are zero-emission vehicles, but the emissions sit somewhere else. Let's talk for a minute not just about the environmental impact, but obviously the economic impact. What we obviously want to do as European taxpayers, I'm South African, but I live and pay tax in Europe, is we want our economies to do well, we want our employment to do well. And when we move to electric vehicles, we have to change the whole value chain. It's no longer about mechanical engineering, it's no longer about securing fossil fuels. It is all now about producing energy in a different way and storing that energy in the battery. And what we are seeing is that Europe is very, very far behind China in the critical minerals that are needed to make those batteries. So economically, every time you make an electric vehicle, roughly a third of that cost is in the battery, and 70, 80, 90% of that money is sent to China because they have the whole value chain of the batteries. That's a slide that demonstrates the point. Because there are three parts to making a battery. The first part is you've got to get the nickel, the cobalt, the graphite, the lithium out the ground. Happens in Australia, Africa, South America. Obviously, there's no mining in Europe. You then got to take that raw material and you've got to process it, which is a very dirty, energy-expensive process, into oxides. That happens mainly in China. Literally 90% of the material is processed there. And then you send that to the gigafactories where they make the batteries, like you have a gigafactory in Germany, Northvolt in Sweden, there's one in the UK going. And we, as Europeans, just have not invested in that value chain. So it's all in China. And obviously, when we go to renewable energy, we're going to need battery storage to store our energy. So for example, in Germany, you have about 40 million motor cars. If you converted all of those to electric vehicles, you would have at least 20 million tons of batteries sitting in vehicles, and those batteries could obviously be used to, keep the power on in schools and buildings and businesses, because batteries will become hugely valuable when we go across to renewable energy. This slide is ready to talk about why we've got this idea so wrong. So that, this is what a lot of policymakers are looking at. They're saying, okay, how can we change the 1.8 billion vehicles on the planet from ICE vehicles to battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles? What I'll argue today, and it's very good to be sitting here with the head of BVG, is that we need to rather look at how to replace motor cars with other forms of mobility. And we need to look at how do you replace vehicles that are doing the most mileage from combustion to electric. There's not much point if I am doing, a daily commute of 5 kilometers a day, changing a combustion vehicle to an electric vehicle, because the emissions sit not in the driving of that vehicle, they sit in the manufacturing of that vehicle. And that vehicle is way underutilized. Electric vehicles generally last between 500 and 700,000 kilometers. Combustion's about 200. So combustion vehicles work quite well for the 10 to 12-year lifespan. Electric vehicles would last 20 to 25 years. So they're not really designed for single ownership. They're much better designed for professional use or for sharing use, where you can get the mileage up, because nobody wants to own a car that's 20 years old. So psychologically, instead of saying, wow, look, we can replace these 1.8 billion vehicles with electric vehicles, we should be saying, how do we convert combustion miles to electric miles, and how do we radically reduce car ownership and replace it with other forms of mobility? And this is the argument today. What this slide shows is that when you reduce car ownership, a whole lot of other businesses start up and start filling that space. They start jumping into the ecosystem, because obviously car ownership is a good door-to-door solution. And one of the reasons people do not want to lose their motor car is that it actually works really well from door to door. And there are not enough good alternatives to replace that motor car yet. But what is happening now is you have obviously mass transit at the base, the super important base of your transit. And now you have a whole lot of other private operators adding shared micromobility. Where is Europe leading in mobility? Europe is making the best, most sophisticated electric bikes in the world. And those electric bike companies, a lot of them are German, have absolutely blossomed. So you start getting a whole new ecosystem developing, which is very European. The money stays in Europe. It creates jobs. It's much more youthful, if I can put it that way. So, creating jobs for young people too. Those companies are often driven by young entrepreneurs. very, very exciting companies. And that's also in the manufacturing of new light vehicles, the mobility shared services, the data, the software that sits behind it. So that is my conclusion. It's a short conclusion, but my argument, as you would understand, is that in order to truly reduce carbon emissions to within the level of 1.5 or 2 degrees, we cannot tinker and say, well, let's keep our relationship with motor cars the same. We have to radically reduce car ownership. In America today, the parking lots of America collectively add up to a space the size of Poland. That's how much infrastructure they've dedicated to car parking. The more car parks you have, the further away things are, the more you need a car to get to them because the car parks are taking up all the space. As you start getting warming cities and a warming planet, what you need to do is you need to take that black asphalt, which retains heat and holds heat. You need to put trees there, you need to put other stuff there because it just is a thermal mass that holds and retains heat. So what I believe will happen is that you'll start naturally getting a movement away from car ownership to motorist to mobilist. And what I believe is that European policymakers should understand this and really incentivize people to reduce car ownership and incentivize businesses like the great industrial businesses like Volkswagen to get more into the shared mobility services and new mobility services. And a final comment I'd like to finish on is that I believe we will start to see light autonomous vehicles on our streets, which will provide another very good way of moving that replaces the practicalities and the convenience of car ownership. Thank you.
Eva, your organization does a lot of moving people from point A to B. I'd like to hear your perspective.
First of all, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk a little about BVG and how we look at Ross's opinion as well. The conference has the title The New Unknown, Navigating Zeitenwende. For us as a public transportation company, we're also sort of in the new unknown. We're part of a very disruptive force at the moment with which we as a transportation company or the business in general isn't quite up to yet. What do I mean by that? We had a very huge experiment in the last couple of months in Germany where we had a ticket for a month for €9 for all public transportation in Germany. So you could buy a ticket, €9 for 1 month, and it was a free ride in a way, and this encountered a group of people who have been sort of in a very secluded field. No one really bothered about how public transportation, especially urban public transportation, works. So now we have all those disruptive forces on us, and we found out that people actually like going with public transportation when it's there, which is the main conclusion of what we have seen, because even if whatever Ross is telling us about the urban space, usually transportation or vehicle usage starts somewhere completely different. Starts in the suburbs, it starts in the rural places, and there, of course, we have a whole lot of people going in cars. So they also bought €9 tickets and said, great stuff, but we can't use it. There's nothing there. So that really is the disruption. If we want to go to a place where Ross wants to go, changing individual car ownership to shared mobility in any way or pooled mobility in any way, we're going to have to enable quite a lot on a digital field to actually get there. So that is one of the most disruptive things which has happened to us in Germany. All the other things, of course, are around us. Energy crisis is one. The war against Ukraine is another one. Then all sorts of demographic issues, because we are still an aging country, and we are now looking for drivers, for example, all over the place. We would take anyone here in the room who wants to be a bus driver or a tram driver. You are hardly welcome. You really are. And because that's one of the biggest risks we have if we want to really go into the sharing world and the public transportation world and reducing ridership with motor cars, increasing trains, whatever. We will need people, even if the ultimate goal might be autonomous driving, but there's still a time in between, and we all don't know how long this time in between will be. Those are really the new unknowns in an industry, as you might imagine, which is really long term. We have long term investment processes. If you want to build a new railway, and you know that it's going to be there for 50 or 100 years, you don't do this like that. It's not one of those wonderful Silicon Valley startup things where you say, okay, let's do it, let's break it, and see what we can do tomorrow. This is not what we do. We plan and we look and we build, and then we build trains, and next week we have InnoTrans, and you can take a look at all those trains. And it's going to take a while. So in this long-term business and in this long-term planning, we are now in a complete new unknown for us, because we have to be really fast in reacting to political influence, and also the way people actually want to experience public transportation. They want it to be intermodal, they want it to be seamless, they want it to be easy, they want it to be currency free. You just take your smartphone and wherever you are, you know exactly that you get the best price. And our answer at the moment as a provider is, you better learn your tariffs by heart, so you know that you actually have the right ticket. So that can't be the way people would want to experience public transportation. And this is not only here, this is really basically all over the place. And there are other public transportations or public transportation authorities which might be a little bit further along, but still, the main idea of how to get access to public transportation is you buy a ticket. You buy it at the driver or you buy it somewhere else, but you always buy a ticket, and you never know whether it's the right price or not. So from our real challenges in the future, we have the demographic part, we have the digital part, and of course we have the diversity part as well, since we are looking at a very homogeneous group of people who are working within the public transportation industry. And you said everyone wants to go from A to B. I don't believe that. It's just one of those myths. You have people who combine journeys, or you have people who are once there and then the next time maybe in 3 months, but then again a lot. You have people who might be handicapped or disabled, who don't do A to B, who do all sorts of different journeys, because that is the only way they get really to their destinations and be able to participate in mobility in general. So we have to look at our networks as well in a completely different way, of really seeing where do the people actually go, and what are their routes of travel. So one of the good news we have is yesterday we opened up an on-demand service in the outer ring of Berlin. You know, in Berlin we have this S-Bahn ring, and within this S-Bahn ring the world is beautiful. Everyone's intermodal. You have all the different public transportation stuff. It's a 15-minute city. You know, it's paradise. Everyone comes to paradise. And then you go outside of the S-Bahn ring, and that's where the normal people live, and they don't have that much access to public transportation, because of course you have 10-minute buses, but sometimes you also have 20-minute tacting buses, and for that you might need something else. So we have an on-demand and pooling system in place now, and that will give us a lot of insight actually through data on what the people actually want and need, what travels they actually do, where are the hotspots within smaller communities, and where have we not seen the potential lines, and we will get this through data and through digitalization. So there's hope out there, and that's the way forward for us, that we really start to combine all those different aspects of what Ross also told us, that we have connected mobility, that we have different sizes of the cars and trains we actually provide. We have shared of course, we go electric, but for us, then ultimately, if we really do all this well, we will also have the possibility of doing this autonomously through shuttles, etc., and then going from the rural places, from the suburban places to the metropolis and back again with all those different modes. Thank you.
Thank you both. I can see that we're really bursting at the seams here. There's a lot of interest in this conversation. I'll just ask you each one question that I had. Ross, how do you respond to the point that Eva made, that the idea of shared mobility maybe works within the city setting, and that the 15-minute city might work for those who live within the ring here in Berlin, but perhaps doesn't for those who live without?
So I live in Paris within the Périphérique, which is the same as the ring, and obviously most cities have a ring where those who live inside can experience a 15-minute city. The problem with living inside is that the rental prices, property prices are much higher, obviously, and properties are smaller. So generally, the 15-minute city works well enough for those that can afford to live within that, 15 minutes ring. The big challenge is obviously moving people from far out in, because that's where the opportunities are in the city. Nobody finds an interesting, or not, it's more easy to find an interesting job in the city center, because obviously the more interesting businesses are there. So, you start getting a kind of mobility apartheid happening in many cities, where those that live close to the opportunities have better opportunities. What was really interesting for me was that when you look at Lagos, the new cities that have to be built in the world are in Africa, because Africa is growing and it's urbanizing. And if those cities are built with a car understanding and not a mass transit understanding, young people will not physically be able to get to business opportunities and be able to get to work. And that's a huge problem. Obviously, Europe is a fairly stable population. It's obviously a massively sophisticated infrastructure. The problems you have are insignificant compared to a city like Lagos, which has 12 to 15 times the population of Berlin. So these problems are huge, and I agree with Eva, absolutely. You have to find solutions of bringing people quickly from the less opportune places to the city centre where the action is.
Okay, and if just a question for you, it's not often that you get the opportunity, rather, to have an experiment like the one you did with the €9 ticket. What would you say is the biggest learning from it, and where do things go from here?
For us, it really was an extreme experiment. We were quite lucky. We have a very, very good network, and we have people who actually used it more for leisure travel, for surplus travel, for going places, and also we saw families going together to to the zoo, for example, which they might not have done before, because actually getting there and buying the tickets would have been very expensive. But one of the two has fallen away, so they got to see different things. We saw families, visiting castles, which they usually might also not do. So that was really, it was a social experiment, and that worked great. And it was summer, so it worked even better. But from the point of view, do we really get commuters to then go into the public transportation system? We didn't see that much, and that would have been the part which we would have loved to see. So, and that's really because there where the traffic starts doesn't have enough public transportation offers, so they really didn't react in the way we would have wanted. So those are the two big learnings. And the third maybe is make it simple.
Transparent ticket pricing.
Yeah, easy, simple, for everyone.
So we only have literally 2 minutes. So I'd like to see if we could just get a microphone for maybe 2 questions, because I know these are certainly topics that are important to everyone. Behind me. Okay, there's a question right here. If Kimberly, my colleague, wouldn't mind getting a mic there.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for this discussion. I work for the car industry, so I work for Volkswagen Group, and I would have loved to invite myself to the panel, because then I could have told you what we are already working on. So yeah, you're right. Autonomous driving is the future, and the electric mobility transformation is just like a interim solution. We have to get to less publicly or less privately owned cars, but more like shared cars, of course. Yeah, that's going to be the big solution. But nevertheless, and I think this is a very relevant topic that you raised, Eva, I think when we talk about urban mobility, everything is so easy and so simple, and we all have, I have, I think, 10 different apps on my phone to get somewhere. And I think the crucial point there is that the majority of the people, or at least half of the people, are living in areas which are not accessible so easily. And these are also those people who are driving still the ICs. And this is going to stay for a while like this, because we do not have the infrastructure also. This is very complicated. It's a complex undertaking to change that. But my question is towards you, Ross. What is your ideal solution for the, let's say, next 20 years? Because we have a problem. The cities are full. Yes, I agree. We have an emission problem that we are going to solve temporarily with electric cars. And the break even, by the way, is after 7 years. If you have a energy mix that we have in Europe, or especially in Germany. So after 7 years, the cars are emission-free. And that's my question. What is the solution? Because it's so easy to say, the private car is the bad thing, and and public transport is the only solution.
Yeah, so I'm not anti-motor cars. My point is that car ownership doesn't make sense for a lot of occasions, and particularly when you get motor cars that weigh 2 tons to move an 80-kilogram person. So what we're seeing, unfortunately, with electric cars, for example, is that people want autonomy of 400 kilometers. So they're buying very big vehicles, and most of the time they're using them for very short distances. So, what I'm seeing is that when you start reducing car ownership, other opportunities come up, because it's like any ecosystem. You take out one species, other species will fill that space. So it's a combination of, first of all, what we call right-size vehicles. There's no point driving a Tesla around a city that has a 30-kilometer speed limit. A Tesla can do 180 kilometers. It's designed to crash at 180 kilometers an hour. It's an overly, engineered vehicle. There's no point driving an SUV around cities every day. So how do you, first of all, make right-size vehicles? What we're seeing in logistics is that the cargo bike industry has taken off, because cargo bikes, for the smallest amount of vehicle, the lightest vehicle, can carry the most mass. So the cargo bikes are now delivering more in cities than before, and vans are now becoming more expensive. So the first is understanding is that a motor car does not have to be a 2-ton, 4-door, 4-tired vehicle that's capable of going, the Paris-Dakar. Light electric vehicles can be completely different shapes and sizes for different functions. The second thing is that once you reduce car ownership, you have 500 euros a month to spend. And that money gets spent on other industries. Volkswagen bought Europcar for good reason. They're starting to understand how do we move into sharing, how do we be more flexible. But my advice would be that Europe is a leader in mobility, and Europe should not see itself as only a leader in the automotive industry. It is a leader in the mobility industry. And cities everywhere in the world are trying to figure out how to move people around, because when you move people, your city economy grows. And Europe should start seeing itself as just an automotive leader. It should see itself as a mobility leader and export the technologies and the learnings of BVG to other cities that need that. That's my point here.
I've been given the sign that we do have to stop at this point, which is unfortunate. It's been a great discussion. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Ross.